So here we are, back in the 21st century, in a world that never truly sleeps. Outside your window, cars hum down the street. Somewhere, a neon sign blinks. Airplanes cross the sky at midnight, and our phones glow inches from our faces. We are surrounded by light, soft, artificial, unyielding. And yet, even with all this brilliance, we are more exhausted than ever. Strange, isn't it? We've tamed the dark, but we've lost our rest. We go to bed late, minds racing with thoughts, alarms already set for the morning. We lie there, scrolling, thinking, waiting for sleep to come like a reluctant friend. And when we wake in the middle of the night, we feel panic. I shouldn't be awake, we tell ourselves. Something's wrong. But maybe nothing's wrong at all. Maybe that moment of wakefulness, those quiet, still minutes before drifting off again, isn't insomnia. Maybe it's memory. A memory older than electricity, older than industry. A memory written into the rhythm of our species, a whisper from the medieval world still echoing in our bones. When our ancestors awoke in the dark, they didn't reach for a clock. They didn't worry about the time. They simply existed, talked softly, prayed, reflected, dreamed, or loved. They were awake, yes, but they were resting in a different way. Maybe we can reclaim a little of that. Because rest isn't just what happens when we're unconscious. It's the feeling of stillness that comes when we stop fighting the night. In medieval times, sleep was woven into the fabric of life. It wasn't separated from faith, from family, from meaning. People saw it as part of a grand cycle, the day for work, the night for renewal. Light and dark weren't enemies, they were partners, each giving the other purpose. And even though life was harder back then, colder, shorter, more uncertain, it carried a kind of rhythm that our modern world has forgotten. The rhythm of surrender. Think about it. They didn't have alarms screaming at dawn, or caffeine to push through fatigue. They worked until the sun went down, then let the body decide when it was time to rest. They listened to the natural cues of their environment, the fading of light, the sound of crickets, the soft cooling of the air. They allowed the earth itself to tell them when to sleep and when to wake. We've replaced that rhythm with schedules, shifts, and screens. And maybe that's progress, but maybe, just maybe, it's also a loss. If there's something the medieval night can teach us, it's that we don't have to fear stillness. We don't have to fill every moment with light, or sound, or movement. There is power in the pause. There is beauty in the dark. The medieval person lying in a wooden bed beneath a thatched roof didn't see night as wasted time. They saw it as sacred. The first sleep, deep, restorative, peaceful. The watch, quiet, reflective, alive with thought. The second sleep, gentle, final, leading into the dawn. A cycle as natural as breathing, a heartbeat of the human spirit. And as we sit here, centuries later, surrounded by the hum of modern life, maybe we can take a lesson from them. So tonight, when you turn off your light, don't rush to conquer sleep. Let it come slowly. Let your mind wander to the sounds of the past, the crackle of a fire, the whisper of wind through wooden shutters, the distant toll of a church bell marking midnight. Picture the world as it once was, dark, vast, and filled with mystery. Imagine those countless souls who woke between sleeps, sitting quietly in the glow of the embers, hands folded, thoughts drifting like smoke. They had no way of knowing that hundreds of years later, someone like listening to their story, feeling that same small, ancient restlessness in the middle of the night. And yet, across time, you are connected, because the night belongs to all of us. It always has. We've just forgotten how to listen to it. So, if you find yourself awake in the quiet hours, don't fight it. Let it be what it once was, a time for stillness, for peace, for wonder. A time to breathe, to reflect, to be human. Maybe make a cup of tea. Maybe just lie there, watching the shadows shift across the room. Maybe whisper a few words to someone you've lost or someone you love. That's what our ancestors did. They made peace with the darkness. And perhaps if you do that, you'll feel it too. That deep, gentle rhythm of the past still pulsing under the surface of our modern lives. Because the truth is, the medieval world wasn't just strange, it was human. And so are we. Sleep wasn't perfect then, and it isn't perfect now. But maybe perfection was never the point. Maybe what matters is learning to rest in the world as it is, to find beauty in the quiet, to trust the dark, and to let time flow the way it wants to. As the historian Roger Eckerich once wrote, at one time, night was divided into two halves, separated by an hour or more of wakefulness. Then came the Industrial Revolution, and with it, the long night's sleep that we know today. But perhaps that older way was not primitive. It was wise. The medieval person didn't have sleep aids or blackout curtains, but they had something far greater: peace with the pace of life itself. They didn't rush their bodies or punish their minds for waking. They simply existed within the natural rhythm of the night. And that's something worth remembering. So, as our story draws to a close, and you lie there, eyes heavy, thoughts slowing, maybe take one last deep breath. Feel the air around you, the quiet hum of the present, and behind it, faintly, the heartbeat of the past. It's still there, whispering softly from across the centuries. Rest easy. The night is long. The world is quiet. You are safe. And as you drift now, into your first sleep or your second, remember that you're part of a tradition as old as time itself. You are sharing in the same peace that countless others once found beneath the same stars. So close your eyes, let the light fade, and surrender to the dark. Good night, and may your dreams be kind. The world began to change in ways that the people of the Middle Ages could never have imagined. It started slowly, just a few candles burning longer, a few merchants staying awake after sunset to count their coins. But soon, night itself began to shrink. By the 15th century, the first street lamps began to appear in the great cities of Europe. Paris, London, Venice, places that once disappeared into blackness after dusk, began to glow faintly under the flame of oil lamps. At first, the light was weak, but it was revolutionary. It meant that the night was no longer just for sleeping. Merchants could work longer, travelers could walk further, and taverns began to stay open late. What had once been a time of silence and reflection slowly turned into a time of noise, laughter, and business. People began to see nighttime not as a sacred pause, but as an opportunity. And with that, the ancient pattern of first sleep and second sleep began to fade.
Imagine generations raised on the soft rhythm of waking at midnight, now suddenly staying up past 10, talking, drinking, working under artificial light. Their bodies didn't have time to fall naturally into that deep, two-part cycle anymore. Instead, they learned to compress sleep into one long stretch, forcing the body to adapt. By the time the Industrial Revolution roared into being in the 18th and 19th centuries, the change was complete. Factories demanded punctuality. The rising bell replaced the rising sun. People had to wake early, travel miles to work, and return home exhausted, often too tired to rise in the night. Sleep became a single, uninterrupted block, the modern standard. But with it, something vanished. The midnight watch, the quiet hour of reflection, of prayer, of intimacy, disappeared. No one sat awake to talk softly by the fire. No one looked up at the stars in the silence between sleeps. The world grew brighter, yes, but also lonelier in the dark. Still, traces of that old rhythm linger in us, even now. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, completely alert for no reason, only to fall back asleep an hour later? You might think it's insomnia, but in truth, it's your body remembering something ancient, something human. Sleep scientists have found that when modern people are removed from electric light, placed in natural darkness for several weeks, they often begin to sleep just like our medieval ancestors did. They fall asleep soon after sunset, wake after 4 hours, stay awake for a while in peace, then drift into a second sleep until dawn. It's as though that rhythm never left us. It's still written in our bones. Now let's step back into the Middle Ages one last time, because night wasn't just a scientific pattern. It was an experience that shaped how people understood life and death. You see, sleep was often compared to dying. Medieval Christians believed that when you closed your eyes, your soul wandered in dreams, sometimes even leaving your body. That's why prayers before bed were so important, because you didn't know if you'd ever wake up. They called sleep the little death, and waking was seen as a resurrection, a reminder of the promise of eternal life. It's haunting and beautiful, isn't it? To think that every night was a rehearsal for eternity. And dreams, those mysterious visitors of the night, were more than just stories of the mind. They were sacred texts of the soul. In monasteries, monks recorded dreams they believed were sent by God. In villages, wise women might interpret a farmer's dream about rain or a mother's vision of her child. People didn't shrug off dreams as meaningless. They looked for meaning everywhere. There were books that listed interpretations. Dream of fire, it means danger. Dream of water, it means change. Dream of a loved one who has died, it means they're calling for prayers. Even kings and queens took dreams seriously. Before battles, some rulers sought guidance from their visions at night. Others claimed to have seen saints or angels or even omens of their own death. In a world where everything was uncertain, where war, plague, and famine could strike without warning, dreams were a way of making sense of chaos. The night wasn't just for sleeping. It was a bridge between the mortal and the divine. Now, not all nights were spent peacefully, of course. In towns and villages, sleep could be interrupted by noise, by drunks returning from the alehouse, by guards shouting the hour, or by the tolling of church bells. There were night watchmen who patrolled the streets carrying lanterns and crying out warnings like, "All's well," or "Beware fire." Imagine waking in your bed to the sound of that echoing through a dark alley outside your window. It must have been both comforting and eerie, a reminder that the world beyond your door never truly slept. And for those living through the fear of plague, sleep took on a different meaning altogether. During outbreaks of the Black Death, many believed that night air carried disease. People sealed their windows, burned herbs, or slept with flowers by their pillows to ward off bad spirits. Dreams turned dark, filled with visions of death and angels. Some people even slept in churches, hoping proximity to sacred relics would protect them. For others, Sleep became an escape from despair. In those dark years, rest wasn't just rest, it was refuge. But as the centuries passed and reason began to replace superstition, people started to study sleep differently. By the Enlightenment, philosophers and early scientists began to wonder, what exactly happens when we sleep? What are dreams? Why do we wake up refreshed? Why do some nights feel longer than others? They didn't have the tools we have today, but they sensed that something deeper was at work, that sleep was essential not only for the body, but for the spirit. Fast forward to the modern day, and here we are, bathed in blue light, scrolling through our phones until the last moment before our eyes close. We've conquered the dark, but in doing so, we've forgotten how to live with it. Our ancestors might have feared the night, but they also respected it. They listened to it. They moved with its rhythm instead of fighting against it. Maybe that's something we can learn from them. Because sleep, in its truest form, is not just about shutting down. It's about surrender, about trusting the night to hold us, to heal us, to carry us gently through its hours until the morning returns. The medieval world, for all its hardships, understood that better than we do now. They lived in harmony with darkness, where every flicker of firelight, every sound in the quiet, every dream whispered meaning. Their world slowed down when the sun set. Theirs was a night filled with reverence, reflection, and yes, strange sleep habits that might seem foreign today, but which carried a kind of peace we've lost. So the next time you wake in the middle of the night, don't reach for your phone. Don't panic or toss and turn. Just remember, you're doing something ancient, something your ancestors did for centuries. Breathe. Let your thoughts wander. Maybe say a quiet prayer or just listen to the stillness. You're part of a rhythm older than cities, older than clocks, older than light itself. When you finally drift back into that second sleep, think of the thousands of souls through history who did the same. Peasants and nobles, monks and mothers, all dreaming beneath the same stars. And when the dawn comes, let it wake you gently, the way it woke them. Soft light creeping across the floorboards, birds stirring outside, a new day beginning. The strange sleep habits of medieval people remind us of something profound, that night was never meant to be the enemy. It was meant to be a companion.
As the night deepened across the medieval world, sleep became a mirror of the society itself. In the cold stone chambers of castles, in monasteries filled with the hum of prayer, and in the tiny cottages of peasants scattered across muddy villages, how people slept revealed who they were, what they feared, and what they dreamed of. Let's start with the peasants, because they made up nearly 90% of the population. For most medieval villagers, sleep wasn't something private. Families often shared a single bed, or at least a single sleeping space. The poorest had nothing more than straw pallets laid across the floor, covered with rough blankets of wool or linen. If you had animals, they might share your space too. The warmth of a pig or a goat could make a freezing winter night a little more bearable. It sounds strange now, but it was perfectly normal then. Children, parents, and sometimes even guests would sleep side by side. In a world without central heating, togetherness wasn't just comforting, it was survival. And because privacy was rare, people learned to treat the act of sleeping as something communal, not secretive. The rhythm of village life followed the sun. People woke with dawn, worked hard in the fields, and collapsed in exhaustion soon after dusk. The evening hours were often quiet, filled with soft talk, the mending of clothes, or the telling of stories by the fire. When the darkness grew heavy, they slipped into that familiar first sleep. Then came the watch, that quiet, almost sacred time between sleeps. For peasants, this was often a practical moment, to check on embers, or on livestock, or to use the chamber pot before the next stretch of slumber. But for others, it was contemplative. Many prayed softly, whispering to the Virgin Mary or a favorite saint for protection.
It was said that the veil between worlds was thinnest at midnight, that you might glimpse spirits wandering or feel the presence of lost loved ones. The medieval night had an intimacy to it. It wasn't dead time, it was living. Now, move with me from that small, smoky hut to the echoing halls of a castle. Here, sleep looked very different, but it was no less strange. In the great castles of Europe, lords and ladies didn't sleep alone either. Their chambers might have been luxurious by medieval standards, with feather beds and carved wooden posts, but these rooms were never truly private. Servants slept nearby, sometimes on the floor or on benches, ready to answer any call. Guards patrolled outside, torches flickering along cold stone corridors. Nobles went to bed later than peasants, after feasts, conversation, or religious devotions. Their rooms glowed with candlelight, and heavy tapestries covered the walls to keep out drafts. But even surrounded by wealth, they were not free from the fears of the dark. People believed that evil could enter through shadows, that witches might slip through cracks, or that the devil himself could whisper temptations in your dreams. So they prayed. Every night before sleep, even the richest nobles would cross themselves and murmur protective words. A dagger might be placed near the bed, not just for intruders, but as a charm against the demonic. The medieval imagination turned night into a battlefield between good and evil. Dreams could be divine, but they could also be dangerous. There were countless stories of people visited in their sleep by dark creatures known as incubi or succubi, spirits that pressed on the chest, stealing breath, desire, or even life itself. Today we might call that sleep paralysis. Back then, it was the devil. And while peasants dreamed in straw huts, monks and nuns were experiencing their own unique rhythm of rest. In monasteries, the night was ruled by bells. Every few hours they rang out across the cloisters, summoning brothers or sisters to prayer. The monks might rise in the dead of night for the matins, a long, solemn service meant to honor God while the rest of the world slept. It was said that praying in those quiet, dark hours was most pleasing to heaven because it required sacrifice. So they woke willingly, chanted in cold chapels by candlelight, and then returned to their hard wooden beds for a brief second sleep before dawn. Sleep for them wasn't just rest, it was devotion. Even the act of waking was spiritual, a reminder that life was temporary, that every moment could be turned toward God. But outside those holy walls, the rest of society was bound by more earthly fears. You see, darkness in the medieval world wasn't just an absence of light, it was a living thing. It carried with it uncertainty, superstitions, and stories whispered around hearth fires. Children were told to stay inside after sunset. Travelers hurried to reach shelter before the roads vanished into shadow. And if someone was caught outside at night, they might hear the distant sound of a bell tolling, a reminder of souls wandering in purgatory, or of death moving quietly among the living. In some villages, people believed the dead could rise for a brief time during the darkest hours, walking silently among the houses they once called home. It's no wonder that night prayers were so common. No wonder people lit candles, crossed themselves, or murmured charms before bed. But not all medieval nights were filled with dread. There was also beauty, deep, sacred stillness, and a sense of connection that we've largely lost. Without the glow of electric lights, the stars ruled the heavens. Imagine lying awake after your first sleep. The fire burned low, and through a small gap in your roof, you could see the Milky Way arching above you. That sight alone, bright, endless, and silent, might have been enough to make the night feel holy. In some parts of Europe, villagers marked time not by clocks, but by the movement of the stars. They knew when to wake for work, or when to start their second sleep, simply by where a certain constellation appeared in the sky. The cosmos itself was their clock. And during those waking hours between sleeps, people might even venture outside, quietly, carefully, to fetch water or speak softly with a neighbor. There are records of women visiting friends at midnight, or of neighbors sharing quiet gossip while tending their fires. It was a time when secrets were shared and small kindnesses exchanged. That space between sleeps was more than rest, it was community. Now, when dawn finally broke, the medieval world came alive again in a rush of sound. Roosters crowed, church bells rang, and smoke began to rise from chimneys. People stretched, rubbed their eyes, and stepped out into the cold morning air. The second sleep ended not with an alarm, but with the warmth of the rising sun. And so the rhythm continued, day after day, century after century, until the world began to change.
Tonight, we're stepping back into a world wrapped in candlelight and shadow. A world where night was not simply a time for rest, but a realm of mystery, danger, and superstition. Before street lamps, before electricity, before the constant hum of life that fills our nights today, people lived by the rhythm of the sun. And when it disappeared beyond the horizon, the world transformed into something almost otherworldly. But before we begin this journey, take a deep breath, dim the lights, maybe pull up a blanket or let that soft fan hum in the background. And if you're new here, consider subscribing, but only if you genuinely enjoy drifting through history with me. Now, let's step quietly into the medieval night, where sleep was not what we think it was. You see, in the Middle Ages, people didn't sleep the way we do today. Our modern idea of an uninterrupted 8-hour stretch of rest would have seemed completely foreign to them. Instead, their nights were divided into two distinct phases, what historians call the first sleep and the second sleep. Imagine this. It's the year 1372. You live in a small village somewhere in England. The sun has long set, and your home, made of timber and thatch, glows faintly with the orange flicker of a fire. You and your family have eaten a simple supper of bread and pottage, perhaps a little ale to wash it down. The workday is done. Outside, the world has gone still, except for the occasional hoot of an owl or the whisper of wind through the trees. As the darkness deepens, you crawl into bed, if you're lucky enough to have one, and drift off into what people at the time would call your first sleep. This wasn't a short nap. It could last for 3 to 4 hours, sometimes more. But here's where things get interesting. Around midnight or so, you'd naturally wake up, and not just for a few minutes to roll over and fall back asleep, but for a whole hour or even 2. Historians call this period the Watch, and it wasn't considered strange or disruptive. It was completely normal. During this in-between time, people did all sorts of things. Some prayed, some tended to the fire or checked on animals. Couples might talk, share dreams, or even be intimate. Others read, if they could, or meditated on their sins, their crops, or their worries. Some simply sat in silence, thinking or listening to the night. It was a moment between worlds, when consciousness drifted between sleep and wakefulness. Many believed that this twilight state brought them closer to God, that their dreams were clearer, their thoughts more divine. Monks even built prayers around this time, seeing it as an opportunity to commune with heaven in the quietest hours of the night. And when the watch was over, they returned to bed for their second sleep, another few hours of rest before dawn's first light. It's almost poetic, isn't it? The night wasn't one long stretch of unconsciousness. It was a gentle rhythm, a breathing in and out of rest and reflection. In many ways, it made sense. Without artificial light, people's internal clocks were tied to the natural cycle of darkness and light. The body would release melatonin as night fell, helping them drift off early. Then, as the night grew deep and their first sleep ended, the hormone levels would dip,
naturally waking them. And when it rose again later, the second sleep came like a calm tide returning to shore. Even famous writers described it. In Chaucer's tales, in medieval letters, in sermons and diaries, first sleep and second sleep appear again and again, as though everyone just knew this was how the world worked. But over time, something changed. When the Industrial Revolution arrived and artificial light began to push back the boundaries of night, our relationship with sleep transformed. We no longer rose and rested by the rhythm of the dark. We forced our bodies into a single, continuous stretch of rest, what we now call a good night's sleep. But in the medieval world, the night was more alive. And yet, it wasn't always peaceful, because the medieval night was also filled with fear. To step outside after dark was to step into danger. There were no street lights, no police, no sense of safety once the sun was gone. People feared thieves, wild animals, and spirits. They believed demons prowled in the dark corners of their homes. Even the church warned against wandering after sundown. Evil, they said, was strongest at night. So when people woke between their two sleeps, many lit candles or whispered prayers. Some used that time to confess their sins to God, fearing that if they died in their sleep, their souls might not find peace. It's eerie, isn't it? How something as ordinary as waking up at midnight could be seen as a moment for salvation or damnation. And then there were dreams. Dreams carried weight in the medieval mind. They weren't random flickers of imagination. They were messages, visions from saints, warnings from the devil, glimpses of the afterlife. A bad dream could send someone rushing to church in the morning. A good one could be taken as a sign of divine favor. In fact, there were even medieval dream books that explained the meaning of certain symbols, what it meant if you dreamed of fire or water or flying. It's fascinating to think that long before Freud or sleep science, people were already obsessed with interpreting what their subconscious whispered to them in the night. But beyond religion and superstition, the medieval approach to sleep tells us something profound about humanity itself. It shows us that rest was not merely a biological need. It was spiritual, communal, and deeply intertwined with the rhythm of life and death. People didn't have the luxury of perfect comfort. Beds were shared, often by entire families or even guests. A straw mattress, a wool blanket if you were fortunate, and the warmth of others beside you. Privacy was rare, and the night belonged to everyone in that cramped, flickering room. And yet, somehow, amid the discomfort, people dreamed. They lived slower, more connected lives. They didn't rush through rest. They accepted the night not as something to conquer, but as something to surrender to.